She was officially listed as deceased, her name stamped into military records with the finality reserved for those who would never return. The report was precise and emotionless, noting the date, the location, and the cause of death in language stripped of humanity. A closed casket funeral followed soon after, attended by a handful of uniformed officers and a family that never truly received answers. Dirt hit wood, salutes were fired, and the world moved on under the assumption that her story had ended beneath 6 feet of earth. For the system, she was a completed file. For those who knew her, she was a ghost that refused to settle quietly into memory. She had not been an ordinary operative. Long before her death, she had operated in spaces where names were erased and faces were never photographed. Her missions were the kind that never appeared in after-action reports, tasks assigned only to those capable of vanishing without leaving ripples. Declaring her dead served a purpose far beyond tragedy. It erased her from watch lists, intelligence databases, and enemy targeting systems. To everyone outside a sealed circle of command, she no longer existed. Even her closest allies were instructed to believe it, because belief made the lie stronger. 3 weeks passed, and in that time, her absence became accepted truth. Equipment was reassigned, quarters cleared, and contingency plans rewritten without her presence in mind. The assumption of death created a dangerous comfort. No one planned for her return because return was impossible. A body buried meant certainty. A funeral meant closure. That assumption was the first and greatest mistake. What no one accounted for was the woman herself. She had built her career on surviving conditions meant to kill her. Capture, isolation, injury, and silence were environments she understood intimately. If she was presumed dead, it was because she wanted the world to think so, or because circumstances forced her into a state that mimicked death closely enough to fool everyone watching. In either case, the label dead became her most effective camouflage. Being presumed dead granted her freedom and danger in equal measure. She had no extraction window, no scheduled support, and no official existence to justify rescue. Every breath she took after that point was outside doctrine, outside protocol, and outside expectation. Yet it also meant she could move unseen, endure unseen, and wait unseen for the one chance that mattered. The emergency beacon was never meant to speak again. It was a last resort device, sealed inside classified gear and programmed with strict conditions that bordered on impossible. Once activated, it broadcast a signal so unique and encrypted that only a handful of receivers in the world could recognize it. The beacon was designed for operators who had no other options left, no radio, no extraction, no allies within reach. When it went silent, it was assumed to be lost forever, along with the person carrying it. 3 weeks after her burial, that assumption shattered.
The first alert appeared as a faint anomaly, barely noticeable amid routine system noise. A technician almost dismissed it as interference, a ghost signal bouncing off atmospheric distortion. But the code embedded in the transmission was precise, unmistakable, and terrifying in its clarity. It wasn't a random frequency. It wasn't a corrupted echo. It was her beacon. The same serial identifier, the same biometric-linked encryption key, a signal that could only activate if the operator was alive and conscious enough to trigger it. Protocols immediately clashed with logic. According to records, the operator was dead. Her beacon should have been inert, buried with her or destroyed in the incident that supposedly killed her. Systems cross-checked automatically, pulling medical reports, death confirmations, and mission summaries. Every file confirmed the same truth: she was gone. And yet the beacon continued to pulse, steady and patient, counting time not in seconds, but in consequences. What made the signal even more disturbing was its condition. Emergency beacons degraded rapidly under stress, damage, or environmental exposure. This one showed controlled output, precise intervals, and clean encryption, signs of intentional use, not accidental activation. Someone wasn't dying in a panic. Someone was waiting. The beacon wasn't screaming for help. It was calmly stating, "I am still here." As analysts studied the transmission, they realized another impossibility. The beacon had a timed lockout designed to prevent delayed activation. If the operator failed to signal within a specific window after mission compromise, the device permanently shut down. That window had closed weeks ago. The fact that the beacon was active meant either the lockout never triggered or someone had overridden safeguards believed to be unbreakable. Both explanations were equally alarming. The signal's location added another layer of unease. It wasn't coming from where she supposedly died. It wasn't coming from a known safe zone, extraction point, or allied region. It originated from a place deliberately avoided on operational maps, a dead space where surveillance thinned and recovery missions rarely succeeded. The beacon had placed itself where rescue was possible but costly, and where ignoring it would haunt anyone who understood what it meant. Within minutes, the beacon was classified at the highest priority. Conversations stopped being hypothetical. This was no longer about how the signal existed, but what it implied. If she was alive, then her death had been false, staged, or catastrophically misunderstood. If she was alive, she had survived something no one believed survivable. And if she had activated that beacon now, after 3 weeks of silence, it meant she had waited for the precise moment when being found mattered more than staying hidden. The beacon's pulse continued, steady and patient, counting time not in seconds, but in consequences. The moment the Navy SEALs were brought into the equation, the situation crossed a line that could not be walked back. This was no longer a theoretical anomaly for analysts to debate behind secure doors. SEAL involvement meant the beacon was real, the threat was real, and whatever waited at the signal source was worth risking elite lives. Their mobilization alone was an admission that standard recovery units were not enough. Something about this mission demanded operators trained to operate in chaos, uncertainty, and silence.
The briefing was unusually short. There was no time for extended speculation or layered hypotheticals. The facts were laid out with brutal efficiency. A verified emergency beacon belonging to an operative officially declared dead was transmitting from a hostile dead zone. No additional context was provided, and none was needed. The SEALs understood the implications instantly. A false death meant compromised intelligence. A delayed beacon meant prolonged survival under extreme conditions. Both pointed toward an enemy situation far more complex than a simple rescue. What unsettled them most was not the danger, but the absence of clarity. SEAL missions were built on precise intelligence, rehearsed contingencies, and known objectives. This mission had none of those comforts. They were being sent to recover someone who, by all official records, did not exist anymore. There were no recent photos, no updated biometric profiles, and no friendly networks confirmed in the area. If she was alive, she had been alone, improvising and adapting without support for weeks. That made her either extraordinarily resilient or a variable that could not be predicted. As preparations accelerated, unspoken questions lingered. Why had the beacon been activated now? What had changed after weeks of silence? Had she been hiding, trapped, or deliberately waiting? The SEALs trained to read intent as much as terrain, and the timing troubled them. Emergency beacons were not used lightly. Activating one meant exposure, escalation, and the risk of drawing enemy attention. If she had waited this long, it suggested a calculated decision rather than desperation. The insertion plan reflected that uncertainty. This was not a loud extraction or a show of force. It was a surgical deployment designed to observe before engaging. The SEALs would move as if entering hostile territory, without friendly confirmation, because that was exactly what they were doing. They prepared for multiple possibilities: a wounded survivor, a captured operative attempting escape, or a trap designed to lure elite forces into a kill zone using a stolen beacon. Emotion was kept in check, but it existed. Some of the SEALs had trained alongside her in the past, sharing ranges, exercises, and quiet respect earned through competence rather than conversation. The idea that she had been buried while still alive was not something they voiced, but it hardened their resolve. This was no longer just a mission, it was a reckoning with failure, whether bureaucratic or tactical. Once wheels were in motion, there was no hesitation. The SEALs accepted the mission with the same discipline they applied to all others. But beneath that professionalism was an understanding that this operation could redefine everything they thought they knew about the original incident. If she was found alive, it would expose gaps in reporting, assumptions about survivability, and perhaps deliberate deception at higher levels. If she was not, then someone had gone to great lengths to manipulate the most secure systems in existence. Either way, the SEALs were now committed. When elite forces are deployed, history is about to change, one way or another. As the implications settled, attention shifted upward, away from the battlefield and into the shadowed corridors of command, where truths were shaped as carefully as operations. The idea that her death might have been false opened a door no one wanted to walk through. Military systems did not misclassify elite operatives by accident, not at this level. Too many confirmations, too many signatures, too many redundancies existed for a mistake of that magnitude to slip through unnoticed. If she was alive, then her death had served a purpose beyond error. Records were revisited with fresh suspicion. Timelines that once appeared clean now felt overly precise, almost rehearsed. Medical assessments relied on data gathered under fire, visual confirmations limited by distance and smoke, and recovery teams that had never actually retrieved a body. The burial itself became questionable. The casket had remained sealed. DNA verification had been waived under classified authority. Each deviation from protocol, once justified by urgency, now resembled a deliberate pattern designed to close the case quickly and permanently. Within restricted channels, quiet conversations began, not about rescue logistics, but about containment. If she had been part of a Black Ops program never meant to surface, then declaring her dead would have been the simplest way to erase accountability. A dead operative could not testify, could not expose methods, and could not contradict official narratives. If something had gone wrong during her mission, an unauthorized objective, an experimental technology, or an unsanctioned alliance, burying her would also bury the mistake. The beacon complicated everything. Its activation threatened to unravel years of compartmentalization in a matter of hours. Someone, somewhere, had believed she would never be found again. That belief had allowed secrets to remain sealed and uncomfortable questions to remain unasked. Now those questions were clawing their way back to the surface. Who authorized her mission? Who confirmed her death without physical proof? And who benefited from her silence? There were signs that information had been deliberately fragmented. Certain mission logs were incomplete. Satellite footage had gaps that could not be explained by weather or technical failure. Communications transcripts ended abruptly, not in chaos, but in an abrupt finality. It was as if someone had decided mid-story that the ending needed to be written immediately, regardless of truth. For those aware of the cover-up's possibility, fear was not rooted in guilt alone. It was rooted in precedent. If she had survived and activated that beacon, it meant she had endured knowing the system had abandoned her, or worse, intentionally erased her. A survivor with that knowledge was dangerous, not because she sought revenge, but because she represented proof. Proof that the machinery of secrecy could turn inward, sacrificing its own to protect itself. As the SEALs moved closer to her location, pressure mounted at higher levels to control the narrative before it escaped containment. Rescue was one outcome, recovery of classified assets was another, but the most sensitive objective remained unspoken, ensuring that whatever truth she carried did not surface unfiltered. The cover-up, if it existed, was now fragile. It depended on timing, silence, and the assumption that no one returns from the grave. The beacon's steady pulse was not just a call for extraction, it was a countdown. And with every passing second, the secrets buried alongside her name were closer to being unearthed. Survival, in her case, was not a single act, but a continuous negotiation with death that stretched across days and nights without structure or mercy. The environment had offered no shelter, no reliable food, and no certainty of rescue. Injury, exhaustion, and isolation were constant companions, each capable of ending her story quietly if she allowed them to. Yet she adapted, not with dramatic heroics, but with discipline drilled so deeply that it functioned even when hope could not. Survival became routine, and routine became resistance. She rationed everything: movement, energy, even thought. Panic was a luxury she could not afford, so she broke time into manageable pieces: 1 hour, one decision, one breath. Pain was acknowledged but never indulged. When wounds refused to heal properly, she compensated by altering her pace and posture. When dehydration blurred her vision, she adjusted her travel to cooler hours and learned to extract moisture from places most would overlook. Every technique she used had been taught with the expectation of short-term evasion. She was now pushing those methods far beyond their intended limits. What tested her most was not hunger or injury, but silence. No radio traffic, no friendly signals, no indication that anyone knew she was still alive. The belief that she had been declared dead became both a burden and a shield. It meant no one was coming, but it also meant she could operate without pursuit from those who thought the mission was over. She remained unseen by embracing that assumption, letting the world's certainty of her death work in her favor. Psychologically, survival demanded something harsher than endurance. She had to accept abandonment without letting it turn into bitterness. Anger burned energy she could not spare. Instead, she focused on purpose. The beacon was not activated impulsively. It was protected, preserved, and carried through conditions that nearly destroyed it. Activating it too early would have invited capture or interception. Too late, and she might not have had the strength left to use it at all. Timing became as critical as survival itself. Her resilience was not rooted in invincibility, but in refusal. Refusal to let circumstances dictate her end. Refusal to become a quiet error in a classified report. Every step she took was a denial of the conclusion written for her. She was alive not because survival was guaranteed, but because surrender was unacceptable. By the time the beacon finally transmitted, she had already won a victory that no extraction could measure. She had outlasted isolation, misinformation, and the system that had erased her. Rescue, if it came, would be a consequence of that victory, not its cause. Against every logical outcome, she endured, not as a legend, not as a miracle, but as proof that even when declared dead, a determined human will can remain dangerously, defiantly alive.